Hello and welcome to my video. Okay, this video is really about convincing people that you don't need to use a pencil to be able to paint. I think a lot of people are put off with the idea that there's no way they can paint a picture unless they draw something first. So forget that idea. Off we go. So, right, my colours that I'm using for this are the usual for my starting colours, and that is sap green and red ochre. Now, I'm just speeding things up here a little bit because frankly, I don't think it really matters whether this is in real time or speeded up. You can see what I'm doing, even though it's quite quick. It will slow down again in a minute, and you'll get a bit more of an idea. Okay, so I've got my got the general guts of the painting down, and I'm sort of laying into it now with a bit of tissue paper. This is to wipe away paint so that I can sort of play with the tones a little bit. And what I'm doing really is trying to compose it so that there are interesting light spots. Most paintings work well when you have contrast, so I'm trying to sort of work up a few contrasty spots just to sort of excite the viewer's eye. And now, here we are, a little bit of oil. This is just linseed oil. And I'm mixing it with this colour, which is a violet, and making a very diluted colour. It's almost a glaze. So this is going to speed up again in a minute because it's a little bit like watching paint dry almost, I suppose. So I'll just let you watch for a second. I've added a little bit of white to the colour there just to lighten the horizon a little bit. Now we're back to normal speed, and I think possibly a little bit of music in a minute while you watch. But not yet. This is what I'm doing here. I'm pushing the sky colour paint into the tree. This is because I don't want the tree to look like a cut-out sort of drawing stuck on a sky. I like to actually pull them together a bit so that they mingle, and that gives you a little bit more harmony in the picture, in my opinion. Not everybody will agree, of course. Right, now here I'm going to start darkening the foreground because I want to bring it, well, it sounds silly, but I want to bring it into the foreground. And by doing that, if you make it darker, it will actually give that feeling of being closer to you, particularly when you start adding a bit of contrast into those dark areas as well. So here I'm just blocking it on quite fast, and in a minute I will start working on that using various things actually. Sometimes I use kitchen towel, and sometimes I will use a brush that I've deliberately allowed to get into bad conditions so that it's got really stiff bristles and irregular sized bristles, because I can drag that through the paint and it will give the impression of there being grass and foliage. There are two ways of painting undergrowth. You can either be the type of person who meticulously paints every blade of grass and every twig, Frankly, I don't think you need to do, well, it depends on you, but I don't feel I need to do that if I can find a faster way of doing it. And this technique that I'm using is not a new technique by any means. The old masters would have done this to give the impression of lots of foliage, except they didn't use kitchen towel, of course, because it hadn't been invented yet, but they would have used cloth and maybe a bundle of horsehair or even a brush that, like I said, has been allowed to become untidy and neglected, because it gives you these little sort of spiky bits to give you to cut into the paint. Hope some of that makes sense. So I'm also wiping away little bits on the path in the foreground. Apart from wiping it generally, I'm also intensely wiping a few bits as well to get more contrast. So here we are, dabbing away. The other thing I do sometimes, which there we go, I'm doing it now. That's basically I'm sort of whipping it to give random strands of foliage. It's quite an effective little technique, that. So what happens next? You have to bear with me on this because I'm doing the narration afterwards. I'm not talking while I'm painting because the microphone isn't good enough, but the one I'm using now hopefully is picking up all the sound. And I do apologise, I think I might have hit the microphone a few times as well. I tend to move my hands around when I talk. So working on the tree here, again I'm pulling out some areas that I want to have lighter. And one thing I will say now on this painting is that this is not a finished painting. This is what I would call my first stage. I get it to a certain point using these colours because it's an alternative pencil, really. It's a sort of permanent pencil. Because if I leave this to dry now for a few weeks and then I work over it again, if I make a mistake when I'm adding my final colours, I can just wipe it off, the fresh colour, and I can come back to this. This will still be there underneath. So in a way, it is my alternative pencil. So I'm using a Q-tip here, or cotton bud, to put some tree trunks in. It's just the highlights catching them. I was over a bit quick. I must have made a bad cut there. And here's a close-up of the foreground, give you an idea of the sort of textures you can get. And here's one of my really bad brushes, so I'm pushing it up into the dark area to give the impression of grass. It's quite effective, a lot quicker than painting every blade of grass, obviously. And the same thing here for the middle distance, just below the tree. Again, I find it very effective and actually quite pleasing to do. Oh, and by all means, use your hands as well. Just because a painting is called a painting, of course, I'm stating the obvious here, but it doesn't have to be done with a brush. You can use your fingers, you can use your nose if you want, as long as you get the effect. Although I have to say, up to now, I've never actually used my nose. If when I come to do the later work on the painting, if I decide that I like the effects that I've got at this stage, I'll leave them. There's no point fixing something if it isn't broken. So, and again, this is all done with, for the main landscape and the tree, it's just two colours, red oxide and sap green. There are lots of different types of sap green, by the way. It depends on the make. I mean, I use a French make called Le Franc-Bourgeois. There's lots of different makes, but this is the one I like because it's really nice and dark. And the red ochre, you can use cadmium red if you want, or you could use burnt umber or raw umber, in fact, depending on the type of browns you want. The only other colour I've used is a violet colour, ready-made, straight from the tube, with a bit of white in it for the sky. The sky will have a lot of work done on it before I finish. And here I'm just wiping out light areas so that later on I can, decide what sort of shapes I want my clouds. Although the way I normally paint clouds, I suppose, could be described as organised chaos, because I never really know until I actually start painting. So it's just one of those things. I often find when I'm painting that the sky is the easiest part. There are times when I've struggled to figure out what to put under the sky. So maybe I should just do some paintings, just as sky is. So here we are. This is pretty well the end now. I'm just tidying up that distant tree, and this is what the painting looks like at this stage. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next video.